Committee to order. Are there any members of the public who have registered and wish to speak?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we have 3 public speakers, the first one being Omar Vera.
Cool.
Good afternoon, MTA, CPOC group, and welcome to the this is the last edition of 2018 of this meeting. And first of all, I have to say, thanks for some of the complete enhanced station initiative projects that need to be done over the past year. But one major criticism: there's still no elevators, and I wish that the ESI would have included elevators in the following stations, because we're in desperate need of them. But fortunately, with President Byford's Fast Forward program, that will be gradually move forward. I already congratulated board member Ira Greenberg for his promotion to be a judge in Queens. You'll do great. Just like the honorable, yes, the honorable. Thank you. Thanks, Mitch. Oh, and let me thank you, too, for coming out in opposition to this fare and toll change that's upcoming next month vote, unless we can somehow delay, because 2 years of this constant changing is not sustainable. I already said it. It's out of the question. It's impractical. And the people need affordable transit to go through. And it must be a subway system that serves all. And we shall make it. Not saying, we need balance. That's all we need, but it should not come at the expense of the people. And so, yes, last but not least, I'd like to mention the Second Avenue Subway Phase 2 needs to start immediately, or very soon, as soon as possible. And I'm not sure why should it take 10 years when they already constructed tunnels in East Harlem during the 70s. I think we can kind of make this, in as soon as 6 years. Don't you think? All you have to do is build the stations, and then the only tunnels you really need to drill are the ones connecting Second Avenue, underneath Second Avenue to the 125th Street area to connect with the terminal for the 456. That's the one major thing you need to figure out. But I feel like it could be done sooner than 10 years. Well, with that said, I shall see all of you this afternoon in Brooklyn. I'll be there. Thanks, and have a good one.
Next public speaker is Jason Pinheiro.
Good afternoon, Freddie and Ronnie. Let me see, where should I start? Jano, what are we gonna see updates regarding Penn Access? Because since I'm a Bronxer, raised on the eastern side of the Bronx near the 6th train, we need 4 new stations along the eastern Bronx, shall we? And we want to see Phase 2 of Second Avenue Subway done in, let's say, less than a decade. And the main line project on Long Island should be done quicker, because the main line needs desperately better service than it's having it now. Because all the good service, the Babylon branch is receiving it, not the main line. So having the main line project done, the main line should have received already the service that needs, and it needs it now. Because I have people that live along the main line and that they are so desperate that they have to see either trains canceled, short terminated, overcrowded, etc. So it's time to put our MTA at the 21st century level. So that's all I have to say for this month.
I'm corrected. There's only 2 public speakers, so that concludes the public speaking.
Thank you all for coming. Minutes of the November meeting are on page 3 in the book. May I have a motion to approve? Second. All in favor? I take that as unanimous. Thank you. Mr. Savio, the changes to the work plan.
There are no changes to the work plan.
Then let's have a capital construction update on starting with East Side Access.
Mr. Troop will give the East Side Access update.
Good afternoon, Rob Troop, Program Executive for East Side Access, and I feel really privileged to be part of this important project. You know, I look forward to getting Long Island Railroad trains into Grand Central by December of 2022. I want to start with our major accomplishments. An important milestone that the project reached is the award of the last major construction contract, CH-058A, or what will be the B and C tunnel approaches. The award of this contract was made possible by the completion of a major part of the Herald interlocking reconfiguration. B10 Power. B10 is the backbone of every systems that we put online, and B10 is important to the project because it's the main facility power substation that's going to feed several other downstream substations, and this will allow the system testing to progress. In tracking our construction progress, we are behind what we plan to do for facilities, power, and ventilation systems, much as the result of water intrusion issues. Water is a big issue, and I am laser focused on making sure we get it taken care of quickly so that we can avoid any further scheduled delays. How are we doing this? We're doing this by first establishing a contract with a contractor to be able to take care of water issues. And in addition, in the interim, we're directing contractor action towards that end. So nothing gets built until the contractor submittals are approved and returned to the contractor. We have made steady progress reducing the backlog of submittals and those submittals over 30 days in review. We owe the contractor timely reviews, and as you can see, this effort has yielded positive results. More importantly, the submittals are being tracked and integrated into the program schedule, and this is part of our more aggressive program management approach which we are taking. We continue to focus our efforts on change orders. The backlog has been reduced significantly, and we are managing the incoming volume. But now our priority has shifted somewhat to the resolution of change orders that will have the greatest impact to the program schedule. Our financial reporting is showing a favorable outcome of actual versus forecast with both the total program spends and third-party spends that are essentially at 100%. Contingency is a good story. You can see we moved $61 million into unallocated contingency, and this is due to lower contract bids than anticipated and lower the projected contract modifications. So, as you know, one of the reasons we have schedule contingency is to deal with forward-looking risks as we install the systems. And project schedule contingency maintains at 10 months, which is favorable up to this point. Amtrak has gotten a bit better, though they are regularly short of plan and need.
I want to interject on that point. This morning at committee, I asked that the committee approved another change order for us to resequence, redesign, and re-execute a rail access route into the Arch Street Yard because Amtrak had not been able to disassemble the catenary on what had been planned. So I just remind everybody we continue to incur cost impacts, although everybody's out, folks at Amtrak I think are trying harder, but we continue to incur cost impacts of our challenging dependence on Amtrak.
So the question is, how are we mitigating the harm from Amtrak staffing problems? Well, one of the things that we have agreed to do is to have private contractors perform some of the work that has been previously reserved for Amtrak force account. And the diagram here shows you some of the planned construction activities which will be executed under contract CH-063. Our 90-day look-ahead includes the cutover of the new GO2 substation. Right now, this is in the way of the B and C tunnel approaches, so getting that online is important because it allows us to demolish the existing GO2 substation. So operational readiness. I've commissioned four line extensions during my 41 years in railroading, and most recently the implementation of 11 miles of new service on WMATA's Phase 1 Silver Line. I'm stating the obvious here, but it's a very complicated process. Service plans, employee hiring, transfer of warranties, transfer of assets, communications to customers, All of this has to be closely coordinated, and a cooperative effort has to be established between the contracting company, MTACC, and the Long Island Railroad. The Silver Line Phase 1 project is very analogous to this project because WMATA did not hold the contract. The Airports Authority held the contract and was responsible for the construction, and WMATA would be the owner in the future. WMATA, we had about 25 personnel that were totally embedded within MWA's project offices to work very, very closely on what that transition plan would look like. And although we are 4 years away from service, LRI needs to build its staff now in order to be ready to operate the facilities and train service in 2022. The Long Island Railroad is in the process of hiring the personnel that will eventually manage the facilities and the service as well. As mentioned many times, revenue service in December of 2022 relies on reaching agreement with our contractors on the integrated schedule. I do want the board to know that Tudor Perini, our contractor on CS 179, is currently progressing work on the new schedule configuration for incremental systems testing while we negotiate the commercial terms for this change. Our MTA-CC team has worked diligently for many months with Tudor Perini to finalize the new testing schedule. We have created a partnership, and I expect that this will continue while we negotiate reasonable financial terms. There's simply too much at stake for this project and too much other work, quite frankly, for PTC to perform with the MTA, not to work expeditiously to resolve this issue. For Phase 1 incremental system testing, the board approved 3 critical contract modifications, so this issue is now resolved and gets to turn green. The PMO, or the Program Management Oversight, defines and prioritizes issues which are necessary to keep the project on schedule, including contract modifications. So we continue to aggressively manage the contract modifications to ensure that the incremental systems testing absolutely stays on schedule. CSO 84 is the delivery of traction power equipment, transformers, rectifiers, and switchgear to the site. We are resolving the room readiness and manufacturing issues, so there will be no delay to the successor systems contract, CS 179. So the B&C Tunnel Approach predecessor activities, we're addressing this milestone by progressing work in January. We continue to work with Long Island Railroad and Amtrak to ensure we get the track outages and staffing resources needed to perform this work, and I would like to thank Long Island Railroad and Amtrak for allowing us to commence this work in January. We know the capacity and how resource constrained Amtrak has been to support this critical project. As reported earlier, the way we're mitigating this is reaching the agreement to increase the production force capacity through the use of qualified contractors, which will be executed under CH 063. Jano, did you want to speak on J.P. Morgan?
I think the board is aware that J.P. Morgan Chase, acting under the taking advantage of the new East Midtown rezoning, has elected to put their new world headquarters on the location of their old world headquarters, 270 Park Avenue. They're going to demolish the existing building and replace it. The building that they're contemplating building is significantly larger. It's 1 million feet larger than the old building. That has consequences in terms of the penetrations that take place through the Grand Central train shed and down to Rock. We have been working with them very collaboratively to resolve the issues of how to configure that structure and to make sure that it doesn't impact on our budget and our schedule. It's not uncomplicated. We have a very strong team, all paid for by JPMC pursuant to a cost reimbursement agreement, that are handling that. We have Randy Fleischer on our side who's handling it very effectively. But it's not uncomplicated, and I just wanted the board to be aware that this work is going on. That's it. Our very clear message and understanding with JPMC is that this project can't, have any budget or schedule impact. So all the work that we're doing is premised on those principles.
Okay. Mr. Pally, of course.
What rights do they have underground?
Okay, I long ago stopped practicing law, but here goes.
I know air rights. I'm not sure I understand underground rights.
There's an easement, that was effectuated at the time. It dates, some of the property rights date back to the creation of the Grand Central Train Shed and the anticipation that there would be buildings on Park Avenue, which was being built above it. What we're operating under is, as I understand it, a 1976 easement agreement, which entitles them to support, to quote-unquote reasonable support. We're confident that the terms that I've identified to you that we're working under, which is we will work with you, we will accommodate you, it needs not to impact budget and schedule, are consistent with the terms of that easement. So we're being guided by lawyers, but the practical design work is in keeping with the terms of that easement.
Because obviously, although East Side Access goes back a long time, when that easement was created, there was no East Side Access project.
Yeah, but there was a Metro North operating train yard down there, which has the same obligation to maintain functionality.
Okay, thank you.
Does that conclude East Side Access?
I think that does, if there are no other questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Let's move on to IEC's review of this, and it has two. So, Ms. Rivera, would you please make a pithy report?
Good afternoon. The IEC report begins on page 30 of your CPOC books. The IEC recognizes the project's team's effort in obtaining the system's CS-179 contractor agreement on schedule. As noted by the project team, obtaining the contractor's agreement on costs remains a challenge. A resource-loaded schedule for both the contractor and Long Island Railroad force account is required to verify that this plan can be supported. As shown in the IEC's report, the current plan reflects the start of incremental system testing for one system in mid-2019. All other systems start 17 months later. This indicates most of the system testing will occur within half of the overall testing duration. Considering the magnitude and complexity of the systems worked for East Side Access, the current plan increases pressure on the available resources, requires additional contract coordination, and if not improved, may result in a reduction of program schedule contingency. In addition, schedule agreement for the GCT course contract work, as well as increased focus on coordination efforts between the track, third rail, traction power, and signal contracts is required to support this schedule. This concludes the IEC report.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Since there are none, I'll ask Ms. Michelle to update us on Penn Access, and I know that will be pithy.
But at the risk of violating your pithiness principle, I just want to highlight that if the board members want to take a look, there are the images of the 4 stations that are centerpieces of this project. We've been using those to show people at these community outreach meetings, and it's part of the story and the enthusiasm that this project is generating.
Great. Good afternoon. I'll start by giving a quick overview of the fourth quarter activities and then briefly elaborate on some of those. The recent accomplishments of this project include the fact that we have submitted the draft environmental assessment to the FTA. In addition, our CMAQ application was certified complete by New York State DOT. We also have been engaged in station access planning workshops, which were convened for Parkchester and Morris Park. And then we're also starting freight rail reviews. However, we do need to bring up that we still are challenged by Amtrak project commitment. This commitment is then in turn linked to our ability to start to activate the engineering for the project. Next. So some progress on the environmental assessment and funding. As mentioned, we did submit the environmental assessment. It is actually hot off the presses. We submitted it today to the FTA. This marks a major milestone for us. It's the start of the federal review process. In addition, we've obtained the state DOT certification for CMAQ funding. And just a few words about that funding. Our project reduces car travel, which translates into congestion mitigation as well as air quality benefits, and as such it makes it an excellent candidate for CMAQ fundings. We've now received the New York State certification, and this allows us to authorize $408 million directly to the project financing.
I have to interview, just clarification, and say that's not new money. That is money already in the current capital program. It just needed to be finally authorized by the state.
Mm-hmm.
So next, as mentioned, we have ongoing community engagement, and this is part of the citywide efforts. City planning with EDC and DOT and the BP's office have been conducting workshops for the Parkchester and for the Morris Park communities. And these discussions focus on how the stations will be connected to the communities. There's a lot of talk about the first mile and the last mile connection so that we can really integrate our stations into those communities. And as mentioned, we've brought up the drawings for you to take a look at. In terms of the overall project status, at this time we're at an impasse pending Amtrak commitment. You've heard about this a little bit before. The key issues that we're facing have to do with the Pelham Bay Bridge replacement and the associated cost allocations. There's also an additional item, which is excessive fees, which are over and above the PREA formulas. PREA is an act that designates what kind of payments one could make to for the use of the rail lines. This, in turn, is putting our submission of the general engineering consultant contract on hold to the MTA until we work through these issues. We will not be presenting to you the GEC contract, which will hold up the engineering. That being said, there is progress on other fronts. As soon as we engage, as soon as we get our engineer on board, we'll be engaging engineering services from Amtrak, Metro North, and also CSX. The design phase agreements will formalize these arrangements, and we're in the process of developing those. We will be reviewing the recently approved track alignment with the frail operators, and additionally, the station area planning is going to continue. The next up will be Hunts Point and Co-op City. We're going to be meeting with those two communities in early 2019. So in terms of general project support, the team has met with officials in Westchester and the Bronx, including the borough president, President Diaz. The project, which will provide radically improved commuter opportunities, has received robust support from the Bronx, from Westchester, and also from Connecticut. Though while we receive positive public reception, we need Amtrak commitments that will allow Metro North to run a commuter service along the Hellgate lines. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Before questions on this, let's hear from IEC, another pithy report, and then questions.
Thank you, Mr.
We
Chairman.
have one more committee to go before we all must, some of us must go to Brooklyn.
I appreciate the warning, Mr. Chairman.
All right. At this point in the project, we have one comment on the report. As you've heard, the project team, I think to its credit, has now completed the environmental assessment, has also progressed the station's site development and preliminaries with the freight railroads, all while continuing to negotiate that critical implementation agreement with Amtrak.
Thank you. And before Mr. Weisbrod's question, one bit of editorial comment. Our stumbling block remains. Amtrak's demands that we pay for a replacement of the Pelham Bay Bridge and that we pay a unilateral rise. It is not only unusual, but not heard of anywhere else in the system, where just because we'll pay more. Now, Mr. Weisbrod, did you have a question?
I hope a pithy question for Ms. Michelle. The Morris Park station, as you were saying, it's really important to have access to both sides, one for the hospital and commercial side, and one for the housing side. Will it have access to both sides of the station, pedestrian access?
Yes, there will be from a standpoint of the transportation. In other words, we will have passengers that have the ability to get onto this, the platforms from both sides. So we'll have vertical circulation elements, and you can actually see it in the rendering. That'll then come over and then drop down to the station platforms.
Thanks.
From your perspective, what is, so that the project does not get held up any further, what's the drop dead date that you need an agreement with Amtrak on, by?
I think I have to answer that. The answer is the project's already delayed. It is in a day-for-day delay, and it has been for close to a year. That's where we are. So there's the goal has been to get it done contemporaneous with East Side Access.
Right, that was right.
So that you would be able to fill up those additional slots when Long Island Railroad decamped with half of their service to Grand Central. That is increasingly a remote possibility because of this delay, and we're in day-for-day delay.
Okay, thank you.
Second Avenue Subway Phase 2, Mr. Gianfrancesco.
Thank you. So on November 15th, the FTA issued the finding of no significant impact on our supplemental environmental assessment. This is a very important accomplishment and milestone for the project. It means basically that the changes we've incorporated since 2004 have been assessed, and a determination was made that we don't need to do a new AIS, and that the conclusions of the original FEIS and the record of decision remain valid. We're now able to take the next steps in federal funding, and we can enter into binding negotiations with third parties. We're fortunate to have many stakeholders who contributed to this result. The electeds and the FTA showed up at our public outreach meetings. Community boards 10 and 11 are actively engaged and provided comments, and of course New York City Transit, who helped us put together the assessment and minimize the impact of the changes. We're grateful for everybody's participation. For our design update, we've worked extensively with New York City Transit and concluded our extended preliminary engineering design efforts. The advanced works design package and the design build packages for the structural components are still targeted for completion in the first quarter of next year, and our goal is to be ready to go out as soon as our funding situation is cleared up. Up until now, we've carried an estimated cost of $6 billion as a placeholder for this project. We derived that mostly by looking at what Phase 1 cost us, which is similar in size and scope of Phase 2, and basically escalating it out from the midpoint of construction for Phase 1 to where we anticipate the midpoint for Phase 2 to be. But we know, consistent with our cost containment efforts and the injunction by the board, that we need to do better. So we're engaged with New York City Transit, working together on value engineering and identifying areas where scope could be scaled back, design criteria and specs can be revised, but still provide the same caliber of service, just in a more cost-effective manner. We're also looking at ways of utilizing what was constructed in the 1970s to the greatest extent. So the existing tunnels that were constructed between 110th and 120th Street, we want to maximize the use of those sections. We're committed also to using design build and to confer with industry experts on the optimal packaging program. For our New Starts funding application, our goal still remains an FFGA by the end of 2020. Moving forward with the FTA support over the next several months, we plan to incorporate the results of the cost containment and the value engineering efforts. This will also put us in a better cost and schedule position going into the FTA's risk assessment that's now needed before approval is granted to enter into final engineering. Now begins the push for federal funds. So we're meeting with our partners in Congress and other electeds to develop a plan to marshal support. We need help from the New York delegation. We need your help. We need everybody's help to make this project successful. Our public outreach is continuing. Community remains engaged and supportive of the project. What's on the screen there is we just put up a new exhibit at the CIC. It highlights the components of the project, the construction methods, and the benefits. We change the exhibits about twice a year over at the CIC. That concludes my report.
Thank you. Mr. Haggis, IEC report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, we'd like to add our compliments on successfully navigating the NEPA requirements and getting the FONSI on schedule, and also for maintaining your goal of getting a full funding grant agreement in 2020. We think these are important for the project and look forward to it happening. We also observed closely that the project team is working with transit to tackle the remaining costs and schedule development challenges for this project. And that's my report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Are there any questions on that? Mr. Pally.
The assumptions made on ridership for Phase 2, I assume they're based on the current Phase 1 real ridership numbers and how they related to the assumptions that were made in the 2004 environmental assessment. Could you just add a little context in that regard?
Sure.
Because my understanding is that the real numbers of Second Avenue subway are higher. I was going to use the word significantly, but I'll leave significantly out, higher than the assumptions we made in 2004.
Okay, so the assumption for Phase 1 was roughly 200,000 daily riders would use Phase 1. Now, to put that in context, that's not a day one ridership number. Right. So the ridership would ramp up. We are well on our way to getting close. I think we're over 190 plus on Phase 1. We're well on our way to that. Where I believe...
And that's after 2 years?
Less than 2 years.
Yeah, right, okay.
And it's not taking into account, there's also a fair amount of development that's right adjacent that's going on right now.
Right.
I believe what was exceeded in our expectations for Phase 1 was the corresponding reduction in crowding on the Lexington lines at certain times during the day. So I believe some stations experienced over a 40% reduction in crowding adjacent to the new Second Avenue subway stations. For Second Avenue subway Phase 2, we expect that we'll add at least 100,000 riders per day on top of the Phase 1 ridership. That's the assumption.
Just in the segment, the new segment, or, well, they will be added within the new segment and then continue beyond that?
Well, added within the entire
section.
The entire section.
Okay. One other question.
And does that, forgive me,
All
does
right,
that factor in the opportunity to transfer from both Metro North at 125th Street and 4, 5, and 6 from 125th Street?
Yes.
There's one benefit that needs to not get lost, and you, Chairman, you and I talked about this recently, which is for the first time it's really going to connect people in East Harlem to opportunities to go north. Metro North's reverse commuting load is dramatically growing, and that, the opportunity for people to work in the Bronx and Westchester is something for the first time is going to be available through the Second Avenue subway.
One other question. We did not indicate, while you indicated that we are applying for federal funds for the Second Avenue subway Phase 2, you did not indicate that we are applying for federal funds for Penn Station access. Are we not applying because of the Amtrak situation, or we're not applying because we're not applying?
We've gone through the federal environmental process in anticipation of potentially applying for federal funds.
Okay.
This is a question that obviously the board and others to work out in the next capital program.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are we ready for Mr. Roche and LIRR expansion?
Yes, absolutely. Good afternoon. If I could just stop on this slide for a second to remind you that it's a design-build project and that we've met our first major milestone, which was the start of heavy construction in Q4 2018. The instruction to start heavy construction was given October 26th this year. I'd also like to highlight that we've opened our Community Information Center in the last couple of months, and if you'd like to take a visit with me, we'd love to take you around there and take you around the site. If you go around there today, you'll see lots of construction, the full length of the project. Since our last meeting, we have received a number of updates to the project schedule. The project management team has approved the project schedule at this stage, and this is a summary of the 9 line items that we'll probably be reporting to you over the next years. If you see the 3 that are in red there, they're all activities that are on the right-of-way. And as predicted and as expected, it is the interaction of those 3 activities that are really driving the project schedule. However, if you look at the items above, if you take, for example, the grade crossing eliminations or the stations, all of those show completion very close to the end of the project at the heavy construction milestone in Q4 of 22. We're not content with that. We're working with our contracting friends at 3TC, Third Track Constructors, to find ways to bring those schedule end dates forward. We need to build in float. We need to find some ways to find some float force schedule over the next 6 to 8 months, and we'll report back as we do that. But the critical path is through the retaining walls, the power, and the interlockings, and it varies from one to the other as we go forward. I should highlight that our next heavy construction deadline at the end of 2022 is actually the operating date for the system as well. So here's what's happening off of the right-of-way. The green shows what's actually currently underway. The yellow shows what's happening or starting in the next 6 months, and the white is showing what should happen within the next 12 months. 2 I'd like to highlight. Well, Carl Place is under construction as a station at the present time. We've closed half of the eastbound platform. But 2 undergrade crossings, Urban and Covert, will be finished in 2019, and we will have those undergrade crossings opening towards the end of next year. That is something that is quite an achievement for next year. Looking to on the right-of-way, there's lots of design underway, there's lots of procurement underway, there's lots of planning underway. We are starting work there on the yellow diagrams there in the next 3 to 6 months in earnest. It's very hard to see what the critical path through all of this is, but if I could take your attention to the 2 what look like purple or pink diamonds at the top. The interlocking number N1 and N3, those 2 interlockings are due to be completed at the end of 2020, early 21. Those are the main milestone targets that we're going to be reporting to you on over the next year so you can see where we are. But those are the key ones to take out of this. We want to report to the board that we have built into the timetable with Long Island Railroad the ability for our contractors to take outages according to this schedule. We've divided the project into 3 blocks, and if you look at block 3, for example, from November to January of next year, the contractor could take overnight or weekend outages. He may not need them, but they're built into the Long Island Railroad timetable if they need them, and there's no impact on service. We think the board should just be aware of that. We haven't reported on finance to the board. This is a snapshot of where we are to date. You'll see that the orange lines give you the expenditure. The expected expenditure for the project to date was $280 million. We're currently at $240 million. We're slightly lower than expected because the contractors held back on some of the retaining walls while they tackle a new way of doing retaining walls, which we think is worth looking at. On the right-hand side, we generally report that we have not used any of the contingency before. The project remains on schedule. There are a number of properties that have cost a little bit more than we anticipated. However, the insurance has cost a little less than we anticipated, so we are still on an overall plan for the overall project. If I consider that slide to be the highest level of costs, here is the ground level at cost management. We're extremely conscious that we should continue and fight cost management and cost containment every day. We are at meetings with our third track constructors every day doing over-the-shoulder reviews or detailed discussions of what they're planning. And we're finding that there are ways that we can be flexible, that we can change how we approach the project to help them deliver on time, build that float, and get us a better project. I'll highlight number 4 on the left if I could. We found that our specifications were driving the contractor to have to buy property outside of what we provided. Well, we went back and took a look at the specifications, and we found a way that we could change the specification to help him stay within that property, keep him on budget, keep him on schedule. That's built a trust, that's built a collaboration, and we continue to work in that vein as we go forward. We have lots of risks. I'm not showing them in great detail here. I've put up our risk register, which is unreadable. That's deliberate. I will highlight number two. We're looking to get much more detailed in the schedule about how to work on the right-of-way. Our contract requires 3TC to provide us a schedule built on 20-day maximum or minimum increments. We're going to get a lot more finer on that because we want to know specifically how do we really manage those three critical paths as we go forward, and they're working with us on that. I will highlight that we slightly missed our commitments to the community by 8 before we started construction. All 8 were related to testing of soil samples that didn't come in on time. When those samples are available and completed, we will pass those on to the public. But we are keeping track of our performance over time, meeting all commitments. I will highlight that the tool that is proving wonderful for the project is the mayor's meeting as we go forward. We're finding that our contracting team is prepared and willing and has been presenting at their working manager level to the mayor's meeting, which is presenting the logistics, it's presenting all the details of what's actually happening on a day-to-day basis, and it's generating wonderful confidence and collaboration through the project. Finally, I just want to say we are monitoring our performance as well as the project management team. We've had something like 1,500 submittals. We are 98% meeting the dates. We have introduced one new tracker this month, which is a performance of the authorities having jurisdiction. We're actually reporting to the mayors and to all the authorities how they're performing. It has generated a wonderful competition because everybody wants to be the best. So we thank them for that. That's my report.
Thank you, Mr. Albert. Oh, wait a minute. We have to hear from IEC first. Mr. Mahabedinia.
Good afternoon. The IEC's report on the Long Island Railroad expansion project begins on page 58 of your CPOC books. Based on the IEC's independent review of the project data, the IEC concurs with the MTACC's statements on project cost and schedule. The IEC is concerned about the limited schedule float and the baseline schedule not being resource loaded as noted by the project. This concludes our comments on the Long Island Railroad expansion project, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
You win the prize. Mr. Albert.
I think one of the real benefits of mainline third track is doing away with some of the grade crossings between the noise that the bells and whistles make, the noise of traffic honking, and I think I've seen the backup of traffic at New Hyde Park Road, just east of the New Hyde Park station. But if you're not doing a grade crossing elimination at the Stewart Manor station, which is sort of south of there, won't we still have this backup? Obviously further south, but we'll still have a backup.
We've been working with the Stewart Manor folks actually in the last couple of months to sort of identify what that means. What we're finding right now that we need to have a certain level of enforcement to make sure that we don't have any issues develop there. Modifying that grade crossing, not part of the project, but I'm sure in the next capital plan it may be worthwhile.
And the Hempstead branch doesn't begin to have the traffic of the main line. I get that, yeah.
Yeah, so we're watching what it means there, because they are interacting in that area. You're absolutely right.
Thank you.
Okay. There's no one else. I want to thank you all and
capital program.
Thank you all, and ask Managing Director Hakam to give us the program, capital program status.
Thank you. I'll actually roll up the remainder of the reports. The capital program status report begins on page 62 of your materials. The quarterly traffic light report is set forth on page 73 for the third quarter of 18, and the change order report, an information item, on page 142.
Questions or comment on what you have in your book? Hearing none. Mr. Savio, quarterly traffic light reports.
No, I just
I'm
wrapped
sorry.
them all up.
Oh, okay. Oh, then
I did a wrap up.
Then unwrap them.
Thank you.
Move to enter into executive session in accordance with the Public Officers Law, Section 105, 1A, matters which will imperil the public safety if disclosed. May I have a second? All in favor? We are in executive session. At executive session, no votes were taken, save for the vote to go out of executive session. May I have a motion to go back into public session? Second. All in favor? We're back in public session. May I have a motion to adjourn? Second. All in favor? We are adjourned.